Bomber aircraft are an important part of any military's air force, and the US has had some of the most iconic and deadly bombers throughout history. Countless generations and models of bombers have been instrumental in carrying out strategic and stealth missions all around the world. But of the US bombers developed since the 1930s, which ones rank as the best? In this episode, we are going to run through the 10 best American bombers based on their payload capacity and flight range. So let's get into it. 10. Grumman TBF Avenger. This is a bomber that is not going to win you any beauty contests anytime soon, but then again, that is not its job. This bomber's job is taking down enemy forces, and that is what this bomber will win you accolades for. The Avenger is perhaps the most potent torpedo bomber that was used in World War II. The Grumman is fitted with some pretty heavy artillery such as 2 x 12.7mm M2 Browning heavy machine guns in the wings, and a 1 x 12.7mm M2 Browning machine gun in the powered dorsal turret, as well as 1 x 7.62mm M1919 Browning machine gun in a trainable ventral fuselage position. The Avenger is a great bomber that is an iconic figure in aviation history and played a major role in turning the tide of the Second World War. 9. Martin B-26 Marauder. In 1930s, the US Air Force provided specifications for a high-speed, twin-engine bomber, and the Martin B-26 Marauder was a result of this. The Marauder had a staggering top speed of 315 miles per hour that gave it an advantage lacked by the much slower, previous model B-17s. The B-26 also featured a dorsal turret, waist and tail guns, and additional guns in the nose, and if you didn't think that was enough, they added fixed forward firing guns to the pods on the sides of the fuselage. An example of the potency and capability of this bomber is the fact that in more than a year of combat, the 22nd Bombardment only lost 14 bombers to enemy fighters, while group gunners claim that it was actually 94 Japanese aircraft. 8. General Dynamics F-111 AARDVARK. The F-111 had the name the AARDVARK as a result of its extended and overturned nose. The design of the F-111 was state-of-the-art at the time, with variable geometry wings, a cockpit with side-by-side seating, and an internal weapons bay. The F-111 was designed to be very versatile and has the ability to navigate and fight in all sorts of weather conditions. The bomber is fitted with 2 TF-30 engines to assist it in flying long distances during missions. There are several variants made of the F-111. One of the variants was even made part of collaboration between GD and Northrop Grumman. The F-111 is undoubtedly a unique bomber that can hold its own when it comes to speed and firepower. 7. North American B-25 Mitchell. The world-renowned B-25 Mitchell was the heart of the US Air Force during the Pacific War. The B-25 was one of the most deadly and lethal bombers in existence during the time, and it played a vital important role in the war. It also stayed to patrol the skies till the very end of the war. The B-25 comes second to the previously mentioned B-17 bomber in terms of the length of its combat career. Another interesting thing about the B-25 is that it remained virtually unchanged throughout the duration of the war. It was so potent and competent that there was no need to improve on any of the basics of the bomber. There was one change that significantly improved the B-25's firepower. By the end of the war, the B-25 had custom guns on board that extended out of the plane and could also retract. This was a major development and completely changed the kind of scenarios in which this bomber could be used in. In terms of ammunition, a 12-plane squadron of B-25s had more .50 caliber guns than nearly 4 whole infantry regiments. That is some serious firepower. 6. CONVAIR B-36 Peacemaker. The B-36 pushed limits when it comes to design and performance. It was far larger than any other bomber of the time. The early models of the B-36 had 6 enormous 71-liter, 28-cylinder radial engines in a rare pusher-prop configuration. These were soon augmented by 4 jet engines for a total of 44,000 horsepower, creating one of the only aircraft ever powered by both. More than 400 of these mammoth bombers were manufactured, and 4 still remain fully intact. Despite its record size, the B-36 was largely overshadowed by its more famous predecessor, the B-29, and its long-lived successor, the still-flying B-52. Somehow the Peacemaker never saw combat and was only in service for 11 years, but its bizarre design is an example of a unique time in aviation history. The B-29. The development of the B-29 began in the 30s when the US Air Force showed their desire to develop a super bomber, and Boeing assisted the US Air Force with their idea of a pressurized long-range aircraft. They had some specifications in mind which were radical for that time. They wanted a bomber that could carry a payload of more than 20,000 pounds, had a top speed of more than 380 miles per hour, and could fly more than 2,600 miles without having to refuel. So Boeing had their work cut out for them, and they started development when they had some competition installed from Lockheed, Consolidated, and Douglas. When they finally presented the finished prototype, they not only won the contract but also got huge praise for their revolutionary design for the bomber. An improvement in the defensive capability and self-sealing fuel tanks were later added on to the design. The B-29 was primarily designed to be a high-altitude aircraft. It was able to fly at 40,000 feet, which at the time was higher than any other aircraft. This meant that the B-29 could fly higher than any Axis fighter jets, and this was a big advantage to have, but it also came with certain complications. To make sure that the crew were safe inside the aircraft, it had to have a fully pressurized cabin. This was the first bomber of its kind to have this feature. In 1945, these super bombers took off for their most well-known missions. They dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The B-29 are the bombers that finally ended the notorious Second World War. 4. Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. While first impressions might be important, they are not everything, and the B-17 Flying Fortress is living proof of that. This is a bomber that, well, bombed on its initial debut. The B-17 did eventually become one of the most important bombers in the history of US Air Force aircraft and has had a lasting impact on the way aircraft are designed to this day. The idea for this bomber came out in the 30s, a time which is thought of as the golden age of flight. The idea came about because there was an immediate need for a long-range bomber at the time. To make this happen, the US Air Force funded a multi-million mega competition between 3 leading aircraft manufacturers at the time: Martin, Douglas, and Boeing. The brief was simple: to develop a bomber that will be required to protect the US coastlines and target enemy assets deep behind their lines. This was in preparation of the imminent threat of another world war. Boeing came up with a prototype called the Model 299. This is what the B-17 would be based on. It was a mind-blowing sight. Boeing won the competition because their bomber was not only several times bigger and powerful than its competitors, but it also outgunned them by some margin. It was powered by 4 engines, which was very impressive for the time, and these engines also increased the flying range by almost double than what was available at the time. It was named the Flying Fortress because one journalist who saw the bomber in action described it as a 15-ton flying fortress. He made this particular comment based on the huge number of guns that were placed on the aircraft. 3. Boeing B-52 Stratofortress Buff. This is perhaps the most iconic bomber that has ever been manufactured by aviation giant Boeing. It was used by both NASA and the US Air Force. To this day, it is active in service and is the longest-serving bomber in the history of the US Air Force. It has played a part in major operations like the Iraqi Freedom, and it supports the US Air Force in offensive counter-air, maritime, and air interdiction missions. The B-52 took to the air for the first time in 1952 before it was made part of the US Air Force in 1954. Over the years, 744 of these behemoths have been manufactured by Boeing. There are currently more than 12 variants of the B-52, all of which are used in different combat scenarios. The B-52 is capable of taking off with an incredible load of up to more than 480,000 pounds. The latest variant of the B-52 is known as the B-52H, and it has the ability to carry a variety of ammunition such as JDAMs, free-fall bombs, PGMs, and cluster bombs. The total payload capacity of the B-52H is more than 70,000 pounds. Considering the weight that it carries, you'd expect it to be slow, but it isn't. It has a top speed of 650 miles per hour, and when it comes to range, it can fly unfueled for 10,000 miles and at an altitude of 50,000 feet. It requires a crew of 5 people to operate, and this monster of a bomber is powered by 8 TF-33 engines. 2. B-1B Lancer. Made by Rockwell International, the B-1B is a strategic bomber that can cause any enemy threat to run for their lives. It has been modeled after the iconic B-1A bomber with a few handy modifications that makes this version even deadlier and stealthier. The reduction of radar signature is one major upgrade when compared to its predecessor. This deadly bomber took to the skies for the first time in 1984. The B-1B was employed in several strategic missions during the 90s. Most of these missions required conventional weapons. These bombers were also stationed at Royal Air Force Base, Fairford, England. 6 of these bombers were placed there in 1999. Their mission was to assist the Allied Force mission which was taking place in Kosovo. The crew for this bomber consists of just 4 people. Even to this day, it has the biggest internal payload bay in the world of bombers. The B-1B is run by 4 General Electric F101 GE102 turbofan engines and can load 84 Mark 82 conventional 500-pound bombs, or 30 CBU 87, 89, 97, or 24 JDAMs. It can also carry an AGM-69A nuclear short-range attack missile. The aircraft can also fly at a speed of Mach 1.2 at sea level and can reach altitudes of more than 30,000 feet. While this bomber might not be in its prime today, but it still is considered to be one of the best and most powerful bombers ever made. 1. B-2 Spirit Stealth Bomber. The flagship bomber for the US Air Force, the B-2 Spirit is a low observable, long-range, tactical, heavy stealth bomber produced by Northrop Grumman. This stealth bomber can penetrate dense and sophisticated air defense systems. The B-2 made its maiden flight during 1989 at Northrop Grumman's facilities in California. There are more than 20 B-2s in total that are currently in active duty at the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. These feared bombers were vital in the Iraqi Freedom Mission and in the Odyssey Dawn mission in Libya. This versatile bomber has a conventional weapons interface system and has the ability to carry 40,000 pounds of ammunition and payload. It has the ability to fly up to heights of 50,000 feet in the air. When the B-2 is unfueled, it has the ability to travel 6,000 nm, and with one refueling it can go up to 10,000 nm. It can carry maritime weapons, nuclear and conventional weapons, gravity bombs, and precision-guided munitions. It also has the capability to unleash the deadly AGM-129 cruise missiles, more than 80 JDAMs, and 2 Boeing massive ordnance penetrator weapons. The B-2 Spirit bomber is the best of the best in the world of strategic and stealth bombers, and that's why it's on the top of our list today. And that's all the time we have for today's video. We hope you enjoyed taking a look at the top 10 US bomber jets of all time. Please give this video a like if you learned something new, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss another amazing video from Insane Reality. See you next time.